Hi, friends. Happy Friday from my backyard here in Santa Fe. Full disclosure, this is my third time trying to record some thoughts on the topic that we're going to explore together. My computer keeps crashing. I wonder if it means I'm not supposed to talk about it, which is all the more reason to do it. So, what I feel called to explore today with y'all is brains, specifically my brain, and how growing up, a lot of my identity was pinned to this idea of being smart, of being the smart kid. And I was a great student. I was very academically successful, straight A's, did all of the extracurriculars that you're supposed to do, to the point that I remember, even as young as 8 or 9 years old, like cheating to get the best grade in class. And in looking back at it, the teachers must have known I was cheating, right? Because we did these grade your own quiz honor code things. And even as I say this, I'm like feeling shame in my body, but we would grade our own quizzes. And I remember kind of hunching over my paper and erasing the answers I had put down and writing in the correct ones, thinking I was being so sneaky. But in retrospect, the teachers must have known. And most likely they were pretty confused as to like why I was doing this. And as far as I know, they never talked to my parents about it. They certainly never talked to me about it. And of course, that created insecurity and imposter syndrome and shame in me that in order to maintain my status, my identity, which I had pinned to being smart, to maintain that identity, that I had to cheat in order to do it. And I even remember one time there was a test in my fifth grade history class. We're going deep into the historical archives now, but a test that was an essay test. And I studied my butt off for it and I took the test. And then the day after the test, the teacher came in and said the grade range on the test was 55 to 105. And I was immediately sure. What a sadistic thing for a teacher to do. But I was immediately sure that I had gotten a 55. There was no way without cheating that I could have possibly done well on this test. So I went home. I had a panic attack. I'm freaking out to the point that my mother like calls the teacher because I like can't breathe because I'm sure I failed, and if I failed, I don't get to be the smart kid anymore. And then who am I? Like a real existential crisis for a 10-year-old. And of course, I got the 105. But that was the impact of the cheating. Never thinking that I would naturally be able to do any kind of academic stuff. And I think the reason for that is that that academic quote unquote success, that external validation of intelligence came at tremendous cost. I had to study so hard to make my brain do and behave in the way that would get me the grades that I felt I needed to get. Like I would take notes and then rewrite the notes and then make flashcards based on the notes and then read the notes into a tape recorder while I went over the flashcards and have the tape playing as I slept. That's what I needed to do in order to get good grades. To the point that studying was really the only activity, the predominant activity that I remember from growing up all the way from elementary school through the end of high school. And alongside that, I grappled with a few things socially. I grappled with never feeling a sense of belonging or connection with people. It always felt like I was missing part of a conversation. I could read social cues, and in fact, I was highly attuned to social cues to the point that I would be incredibly sensitive. So if somebody looked at me in what I interpreted as being the wrong way, I would flip out. I would start hitting things. I would run out of the room. There's a lot of emotional sensitivity there. And I remember being in high school and one of the guys who lived in my neighborhood who went to school with me, there were only like three or four of us in my neighborhood who went across town to school. He would invite me to like play catch. And I remember feeling so nervous, like a first date almost. Like, how do I behave? Are we just playing catch? What if we want to talk about things? Can we talk about things? What if I drop the ball? That'll be embarrassing. This just loop. We only played catch a couple of times because I was pretty twitchy and weird. So all of this created like a near constant sense of anxiety and exhaustion and depression, just like energy dips, sadness. Now, if you're listening to this and you know anything about what is called like neurodivergence, you're probably like going down a checklist in your head, going like, "Oh yeah, that kid's brain worked differently," which is 100% true. I had no context for that at the time. Although there was a moment that I recently verified with my parents where I applied to go to, a fancy private school in Washington, D.C. They make you take these tests when you're 9, 10 years old. And they actually called my parents to say, hey, Michael scores off the charts in verbal and math, but this other thing, spatial reasoning, well, he's going to be okay, but you might want to have him checked. My parents, of course, discarded that. So there were these signs that my brain worked a little bit differently for a long time. This isn't something that I've talked about much. And what I've come to realize, right, as I've put the pieces together and kind of put in this context of the way our brains process information and relationship and social environments in large groups. I can't really be in large groups. Like concerts are kind of a nightmare for me because there's so much going on and I have that sensitivity to people's experience and emotion. But having worked now with thousands of people one on one and in large groups all over the world, I, I kind of think neurodiversity is normal. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. And what it brings up for me is the question of if we're talking about neurodiversity, what are we diverging from and who defines the norm? So if we think of the culture from which the study of neurodiversity emerges, it is a Western normative, productivity based linear culture, right? In order to excel in a natural way in this culture, you have to be built for consistent effort, right? For um, kind of pedal to the metal, go hustle. There's no space for rest. There's no space for rhythm. There's no space for hyper focus. I remember working in fundraising years ago, one of my first jobs, and a coworker looked at me one day and went, I don't understand you. You won't do anything for a month, and then you'll do 3 months of work in 2 days. Because I would hyper focus. I would just lock in and poof, the thing would be done. And then I wouldn't, I'm like the worst employee you could possibly have because I work naturally in rhythms. So who defines what normative is? And what does it mean for kids like me who do have the capacity and somehow the energy stores to like force our brains and nervous systems to perform in a certain way in order to get external validation? And at some point, for me, it was at age 35, that just becomes unsustainable. The body, the nervous system can't take it. And we go into like a healing crisis, which might look like depression or anxiety or drug use or alcohol use or any kind of addictive behavior just to kind of try to regulate things. At least that was my experience of it. So working with thousands of people all over the world, one on one and in groups, realizing that everyone, if I have a group of 20 people, maybe one or two would be what would be considered normative, right? Neuronormative, if that's even a term. And the rest of everyone else, our brains are working in different ways, similar to each other, maybe dissimilar. Some people are like really engaging in individual reflection. Others love collaboration and creativity. But in any group, you're going to have this incredible, beautiful diversity of how people encounter the world with their brains, with their bodies, with their senses, their creativity, their hearts. And our culture, particularly the culture of education, as I experienced it, did not value that, did not lift that up, did not celebrate that. And how much is lost when we try to hew so closely to these performance standards that are developed for a very specific mind that it was like cherry picked to be a high producer in a capitalist culture. So I'm holding all of this wanting and loving to celebrate the different ways that minds interact with the world, that consciousnesses or emanations of consciousness interact with the world. And I'm also holding it alongside the emergence of AI, which is kind of like the most highly refined version of what a neurotypical, again, defined by the culture, a neurotypical brain can do. It can digest information and spit it back at you so quickly. It can be more productive than even the most powerhouse productivity human. We've essentially created in the least efficient, most energy gobbling way possible what I tried to get my brain to do as a kid, which is digest information, regurgitate it, synthesize it, regurgitate it again, iterate on it. So one of the things I think about as I've, explored the capabilities of AI is now that we've done the thing, we've built the least efficient, most monstrously energy intensive version of a neurotypical brain. Go humanity. What what role do humans have to play? There was an article I read a few weeks ago that I included in my newsletter around, in a world where AI does a lot of the, or can do a lot of the kind of functional things that leaders historically have done, what is the role of the leader? And the image that comes to me, kind of like we explored together that vision in the first episode of these field notes, is this idea of like coming together in community and breathing and sharing our perspectives, co-creating stories that come from each of our unique ways of processing reality, of being in the world. And from that, honoring what wants to emerge from those uniquely, I won't even say human capabilities, but things that are unique to the living world, like ecosystemic relationship, like being able to sit with a tree and feel its energy, like nervous system co-regulation. And my hope is that as AI continues to get a foothold, if not a stranglehold, in the workplace, that those uniquely human and living being capacities will be leaned into and lifted up and celebrated and rebuilt, because we've lost a lot of them, particularly in the workplace, where there's so much fear around connection, trust, humanity, much less listening to the ocean for strategic guidance, another thing AI can't do. So my hope is that all of that gets to be lifted up and that I get to help do that. And my fear is that, as with other technologies in the past, we'll go the opposite direction, which is optimizing our workplace and our brains, not for the uniquely human, but to be of deeper service to the artificial intelligence, right? To the machine. And in doing so, lose more and more and more and more of those life-giving capacities that weave us into relationship with the living world. That's the fear that I hold, and it's based on how we've adapted to technologies in the past. Remember when the internet was going to bring us all together? And social media was going to deepen our connections. They don't even claim to do that anymore. So like, we have this cultural history of building our workplaces, building our culture, building our norms around our technological advancements instead of allowing them to support us. I think I've mentioned that before here. So those are all the things that I'm sitting with. And the other thing that wants to be shared, just by way of closing the loop on my childhood of forcing my brain to do things, is that somehow after I had my, you know, healing crisis about 15 years ago, the life that has built itself around the process of coming back from that is so aligned with the way that my nervous system and my brain loves to interact with the world, right? Sharing things as they emerge in the moment, working at a deep level with people in containers that are designed, sometimes by me, sometimes by others, to hold those deep interactions. Living in a place like New Mexico that's a little bit quieter. All of these things were not, I didn't design them consciously, but it's just following inner attunement, following resonance, what seems to have happened. And so now that I hold more of this in conscious awareness, I'm really curious to see how it all unfolds. And I'm also curious how this field note in particular is resonating with you. What resonates with your experience of growing up? Where are those places where you felt those tensions between what the world or what the culture celebrates and the way that you naturally feel moved to move in the world? Whatever it might be, I'd be so curious to hear notes from your field around this idea of what happens or what becomes possible when we celebrate all the beautiful different ways that we each experience the world, express our creativity, express our heart, and ultimately, I think, are called at a soul level to participate in supporting all life. I have no idea what I just said in any of that. I'm excited to listen alongside you. Thanks as always for listening, and I'll see you next time.